Self-importance. One morning, I received a phone call, and to my surprise, it was Carlos. He told me that he would arrive at the airport in Mexico City in 4 hours, and asked if I could pick him up. I told him it would be a pleasure. He gave me the number of his flight, and I figured that he was calling from the airport in Los Angeles, since that would fit the time required for the trip. When he arrived, I accompanied him on some errands related to the printing of his book. Afterwards, we went to a cafe for a chat. Before saying goodbye, we agreed to meet at the place where he was giving a lecture that night. The weather was terrible. Perhaps that was why, when I arrived at the house where the appointment was, I found that just a few people had arrived. I placed my coat, sopping wet, over the back of a seat and sat down in a corner near Carlos. The core of his statements that evening was that the universe in its great entirety is feminine and of a predatory nature. And there is a tenacious battle of consciousness going on, where, as always, the strongest absorbs the weakest. On the cosmic scale, the strength of a being is measured not by its physical capability, but by its capacity to manipulate awareness. It follows that if we are to take the next evolutionary step, it must be done by means of discipline, determination, and strategy. Those are our weapons. Through their seeing, sorcerers witness that struggle, and they take their place in it, ready for the worst and without complaining about the result. For their ever-ready disposition for combat, they have won the title of warriors. A warrior considers the world we live in to be a great mystery, and he knows that the mystery is there to be revealed to those who deliberately look for it. That attitude of audacity will occasionally move the tentacles of the unknown, making the spirit manifest itself. He explained to us that the warrior's audacity is born out of the contact with his imminent death. He told us a story of a girl who one day arrived at his editor's office, put a small mat down on the floor, sat down on it, and told the editor, "I won't leave until I speak to Carlos Castaneda." All attempts to discourage her were useless. The girl remained inflexible. Finally, the editor called Carlos and told him that a crazy girl demanded his presence. What could I do? I went there and met her. When I asked her the reason for her strange behavior, she told me that, being deadly sick, she had gone to the desert to die. But while she meditated in solitude, she understood that she had still not tried everything, and she decided to play her last card. For her, that meant to know the Nagual in person. Impressed by her story, I made her a unique proposition. Leave everything and come to the world of the sorcerers. She answered at once, "I'm game." When I heard her answer, my hair stood on end, because Don Juan used to say the same thing to me. If we're going to play, then let's play. But we play to the death. That is the sorcerer's feeling in front of his destiny. I bet my life on this intent, nothing less. I know that my end could be waiting for me anywhere, and there isn't anything I can do to avoid it. I will walk down my path with utmost concentration. I accept the responsibility of living fully. I will risk everything on a single hand. A warrior knows that no victory is guaranteed when faced with death. Even so, he freely enters into his battle, not because he believes he will win, but for the excitement of his war. For him, entering the war is already a victory. And while he fights, he is happy. Because, for one, he is already dead. Every second of life is a gift. He continued by saying that what makes it possible for the world to exist, just as we see it, is our attention, and that of all our fellow men, focused simultaneously and connected in a tight net of interpretations, reinforced agreement. One of those present asked him to further clarify this topic. He explained, "See, the domain of attention is of supreme importance in the path of sorcerers, because it is the primary matter of creation. In all worlds, degrees of evolution are measured by the ability to realize, to be aware. In order to manipulate and understand the emanations which arrive to our senses, sorcerers develop the power of their attention, sharpening it through discipline to exquisite levels, which allow them to transcend human limitations and to fulfill all the possibilities of perception. Their concentration is so intense that they can penetrate the thick armor of appearances and expose the essence of things. Seers call that degree of increased awareness seeing. Even though such a fixed attention may seem like stubbornness, obsession, or fanaticism, for the practitioner, it's nothing but discipline. He warned us not to confuse the discipline of sorcerers with people's repetitive routines. Discipline, as understood by a warrior, is creative, open, and produces freedom. It is the ability to face the unknown, transforming the feeling of knowing into reverent astonishment, of considering things that exceed the scope of our habits, and daring to face the only war that is worthwhile, the battle for awareness. It is the courage to accept the consequences of our actions, whatever they may be, without self-pity or feelings of blame. Having discipline is the key to handling attention, because it takes us to the will. And this allows us to modify the world until it becomes what we want it to be, and not like the one which was imposed on us from the outside. For this reason, will is the threshold of intent for warriors. Its power is so great that when it is focused on something, it can produce the most astonishing effects. As examples, he told us many stories about extraordinary events he had witnessed. He maintained that underlying each one of the prodigious actions of sorcerers, there is a whole life of discipline, sobriety, detachment, and analytical capability. Warriors place the highest value on these attributes, and together they constitute the state of being which they call impeccability. He went on to explain that impeccability doesn't have anything to do with an intellectual position, a belief, or anything like that. It is a consequence of saving energy. A warrior accepts with humility what he is, and he doesn't squander his power on lamenting because things are not otherwise. If a door is closed, we don't kick it and punch it. Instead, we attentively study the lock and figure out how to open it. In the same way, If his life is not satisfactory, the warrior is not offended, nor does he complain. On the contrary, he designs strategies to alter the course of his destiny. If we learn how to curb our self-pity and at the same time make room for the authentic me, we will become drivers of cosmic intent and conduits for torrents of energy. In order to flow in such a way, we must learn to trust our resources and to understand that we were born with everything we need for the extravagant adventure which is our life. As a warrior, each man or woman has entered the path of sorcery. Who has entered the path of sorcery knows that he or she is responsible for him, herself. He or she doesn't look aside, seeking approval, or trying to discharge their frustrations on others. Don Juan told me, what you are looking for is within yourself. You have to struggle to make your actions final and to achieve your own clarity. Commit yourself before it's too late. The aspect of impeccability which particularly concerns our daily lives is knowing how exercising our freedom affects others and avoiding the resulting friction at any cost. Occasionally, our relationships with others will generate friction and expectations. A fighting sorcerer pays close attention to his contacts and becomes a hunter of signs. If there are no signs, he doesn't interact with people. He is content to wait because, although he doesn't have time, he has all the patience in the world. He knows that too much is at stake and won't risk ruining everything by one false move. Since he is never desperate to achieve contact with anyone, the warrior can choose his affections with sobriety and detachment, taking care at all times that the people he consents to be with are compatible with his energy. The secret to achieving such clarity of vision consists in identifying oneself and not identifying oneself. A sorcerer identifies himself with the abstract, not with the world. And that allows him to be independent and take care of himself. Then he told us a story about a guy who considered himself to be a great warrior. But every time he had problems at home, his wife didn't make him dinner or didn't wash or iron his clothes. He collapsed in chaos. After a long battle with that situation, the man decided to introduce a radical change in his life. But instead of reforming his character like he was supposed to do, he changed his wife for another one. Realize that face to face with our destiny, each one of us is alone. So take control of your own life. A warrior polishes details, develops his imagination, and puts his ingenuity to the test by resolving situations. It's inconceivable for him to feel destitute because he has self-control and he doesn't need anything from anybody. By concentrating on details, he learns how to cultivate delicacy, subtlety, and elegance. Don Vicente Medrano said that the beauty of this struggle is shown in the invisible stitches. That is the sorcerer's trademark, the fulfillment of intent. The gift of independence and the control of details produce the capacity to persist where other people would desist. When arriving at this point, the warrior is barely a step away from impeccable conduct. Impeccability is born of a delicate balance between our internal being and the forces of the external world. It is an achievement that requires effort, time, dedication, and being permanently attentive to the objective, so that the final purpose is never lost from sight. But mainly, it requires persistence. Persistence defeats apathy. It is as simple as that. The threshold of magic is an intent sustained beyond what seems possible, desirable, or reasonable. It is a mental leap to become tuned to the will of the eagle's emanations and to allow their command to loosen the rigidity of our limits. But few are willing to pay the price, to walk the extra mile. He admitted that on several occasions he was about to abandon his teacher, oppressed by the magnitude of the task he was given. What saved him in the end and gave him a second wind was a wave of energy that the warrior finds within himself when everything seems lost. Many apprentices, after searching for years and not finding anything to satisfy their expectations, retire disappointed without knowing that maybe they were just a few steps from their goal. He shook his head and commented sadly, "We should not die on the beach after swimming so far." Once he has gained flexibility, humility, a sense of independence, control of details, and persistence, a warrior in search of impeccability knows that he has gained the power of his decisions. He is authorized to do or not do according to what suits him, and nobody can force him to do anything. It is at this point that he needs, more than ever, to be the owner of his emotions and of his mind, because clarity joined with power make an explosive mixture. It can easily make a man reckless. The path of the warrior consists of saving energy. Everything that goes against that threatens his intent to be impeccable. But sometimes, because of the surplus of power which is accumulated in his luminosity, circumstances can take a particularly hard turn for him. His dilemma is the same which faces a hang glider who, after struggling for hours to get up to the mountaintop carrying his heavy equipment, finds that weather conditions are no longer right for the flight. In a situation like that, it is easier for the athlete to decide to jump anyway than decide to remain on the ground. If he hasn't learned to control his decisions appropriately, the most probable outcome is that he jumps to his death. In the same way, there will be times when the apprentice forgets that his objective is not to nourish his ego, and he enters into situations which are stronger than him. Not only can this be fatal, but it constitutes a serious breach of discipline that will plug him into the labyrinths of power. In these cases, power becomes his executioner. A warrior of knowledge does not senselessly surrender to the excitement of war. First, he observes the conditions. gauges his possibilities, and establishes his support points. Then, depending on this evaluation, he will rush forth or retreat without the slightest hesitation. He does not deal his blows out blindly, but turns every step into an immaculate exercise of strategy. The apprentice who does not learn in time to decide how, when, and with whom he must enter into battle is removed, either because someone kills him or because he is defeated so many times that he cannot rise again. The warrior's final challenge is to balance all the attributes of his path. Once he does that, his purpose becomes inflexible. He is no longer moved by a desperate desire for gain. He is the owner of his will and can put it to his personal service. When he arrives at that point, the warrior has learned how to be impeccable. And for him to continue being impeccable depends totally on the energy he has accumulated. He gave as an example an apprentice who uses his recently won powers to become rich. He then comes to a forked road, either entering into the mindset of, I want this, I want that, or to cultivate intent. If he chooses the first option, he has arrived at the end of his path, because no matter how much energy he dedicates to them, the yearnings of the ego are never really satisfied. In the second option, on the other hand, he has found his route to freedom. Intent is the tuning of our attention to cosmic awareness, which transforms our volition into commands of the ego. We must be daring to attempt it deliberately. But once there, everything becomes possible. Intent allows sorcerers to live in a non-ordinary world and to intend the destiny of freedom. For them, freedom is a fact, not just a utopia. By ignoring the principles of the warrior's way, modern man has wound up in a diabolical trap, made up of family, religious, and social concerns. He works 8 hours a day in order to maintain his way of life. Then he returns home, where the wife always awaits him and his children, identical to any other of 1 billion children, will demand things from him and force him to continue in his chains until his powers are drained and he becomes a useless object who sits meditating over his memories in a corner of the house. They told him that this is happiness, but he doesn't feel happy. He feels shackled. Be warriors. Stop that. Realize your potential and free yourselves from whatever. Don't impose limits on yourselves. If you can defy the force of gravity and fly, that's great. And if you still have the impetus to challenge death and buy a ticket to eternity, that is tremendous. Take a risk. Get out of the trap of self-reflection and dare to perceive all that is humanly possible. A warrior of knowledge makes an effort to be authentic, and he won't accept any compromises because the object of his fight is total freedom. Awareness of death. Over the years, the need to understand the world had led me to store a lot of scientific or religious explanations on almost everything, which all had one common denominator: a great trust in the continuity of man. By helping me to see the universe with the eyes of a sorcerer, Carlos destroyed that sensation in me. He made me see that death is an irrevocable reality, and that to avoid acknowledging it by applying second-hand beliefs is shameful. On one occasion, someone asked him, "Carlos, what expectations do you have for the future?" He jumped. "There are no expectations. Sorcerers don't have a tomorrow." That night, a large group of interested people had gathered in the auditorium of a private residence near the area of San Geronimo. When I arrived, Carlos was already there. He was smiling, busily answering questions. His initial topic was what he called not doing, an activity specially designed to banish any trace of everyday habits from our lives. He affirmed that not doing is the favorite exercise of apprentices because it introduces them to a marvelous environment and creates a very refreshing bewilderment for one's energy. The effect this has on one's awareness they call stopping the world. In response to some questions, he explained that not doing cannot be reasoned out. Any effort applied toward understanding it is in fact an interpretation of the teaching and goes automatically into the field of doing. The premise of sorcerers for dealing with this kind of practice is inner silence. And the quality of silence required for something so enormous as stopping the world can come only from direct contact with the great truth of our existence, that we are all going to die. He advised us, if you want to know yourselves, be aware of your personal death. It's not negotiable. It is the only thing that you can seriously own. Everything else may fail, but not death. You can take that as a fact. Learn how to use it to produce real effects in your lives. Also, stop believing in fairy tales. Nobody needs you out there. None of us is so important that it justifies inventing something as fantastic as immortality. A humble sorcerer knows that his destiny is the same as that of any other living being on earth. So, instead of having false hopes, he works concretely and with great effort to escape the human condition and to reach the only exit we have, the breaking of our perceptual barrier. While you listen to death's advice, make yourself responsible for your lives, for the totality of your actions. Explore yourself, recognize yourself, and live intensely like sorcerers live. Intensity is the only thing that can save us from boredom. Once aligned with death, you will be able to take the next step, reducing your baggage to a minimum. This is a prison world, and we must leave it as fugitives. We can't take anything with us. Human beings are travelers by nature. To fly and to know other horizons is our destiny. Do you take your bed or your dining table with you on a trip? Synthesize your life He made the comment that humanity in our time has acquired a strange habit that is symptomatic of the mental state we live in. When we travel, we buy all kinds of useless devices in other countries, things that we certainly would never buy in our own country. Once we return home, we store them in a corner and end up forgetting their existence, until one day we notice them by chance and toss them in the garbage. And we behave this way on the journey that is our life. We are like donkeys carrying a bale of useless stuff. There is nothing valuable there. Everything we did at the end, when old age assaults us, only serves to endlessly repeat some sentence or other, like a scratched record. A sorcerer asks himself, what is the sense of all this? Why invest my resources in something which won't help me at all? The appointment of a sorcerer is with the unknown. He cannot commit his energy to nonsense. While you walk the earth, collect something of true value from it. Otherwise, it wasn't worth it. The power that governs us has granted us a choice. Either we spend life prowling around our familiar habits, or we encourage ourselves to get to know other worlds. The only thing which can give us the necessary jolt is the awareness of death. An ordinary person spends his whole existence without ever stopping to reflect, because he thinks that death is at the end of life. After all, we will always have time for it. But a warrior has discovered that this is not true. Death lives beside us, an arm's length away, permanently alert, looking at us, ready to jump at the smallest provocation. The warrior transforms his animal fear of extinction into an opportunity for joy, because he knows that all he has is this moment. Think as warriors. We are all going to die. One of those present asked him, Carlos, in another lecture, you told us that having the spirit of a warrior means seeing death as a privilege. What does that mean? He answered, it means to leave our mental habits behind. We are so accustomed to coexistence that even face to face with death, we continue thinking in group terms. Religions don't tell us about the individual in contact with the absolute, but of flocks of sheep and goats who go to heaven or to hell according to their fortune. Even if we are atheists and don't believe that anything happens after death, that anything is generic. We assume it is the same for everybody. We cannot conceive of the idea that the power of an impeccable life can change things. In the view of such ignorance, it is normal for an ordinary man to feel panic regarding his end. Try to deal with it with prayers and medicines, or confuse himself with the noise of the world. Human beings have an egocentric and extremely simplistic vision of the universe. We never stop to consider our destiny as transitory beings. However, our obsession with the future betrays us. The sincerity or cynicism of our convictions makes no difference, because deep down, we all know what is going to happen. That's why we all leave signs behind. We build pyramids, skyscrapers, make children, write books, or, at the very least, draw our initials in the bark of a tree. It is the ancestral fear, the silent knowledge of death, which is behind that subconscious impulse. But there is one group of human beings who have been able to face that fear. As opposed to ordinary people, sorcerers eagerly seek out any situation that will take them beyond social interpretations. What better opportunity than their own extinction? Thanks to their frequent excursions into the unknown, they know that death is not natural, it is magical. Natural things are subject to laws, but death is not. To die is always a personal event, and for that sole reason, it is an act of power. Death is the gateway to infinity, a door made to the exact measure of each of us, which we will all pass through someday, returning to our origin. Our lack of understanding impels us to see it as a common reducer. But no, there is nothing common about it. Everything about it is extraordinary. Its mere presence gives life, power, and gives focus to the senses. Our existences are made up of habits. Already at birth, we are programmed as a species, and our parents are in charge of narrowing that programming even further as they guide us toward what society expects from us. But nobody can die as a routine, because death is magical. It lets you know that it is your inseparable advisor, and it tells you, be impeccable. Your only option is to be impeccable. A girl who took part in this conversation was clearly affected by his words and commented that the obsessive presence of death in his teachings was a detail that contributed to darken them. She would have liked a more optimistic emphasis, more focused on life and its accomplishments. Carlos smiled and replied, "Oh, sweetheart, your words show a lack of deep experience with life. Sorcerers are not negative. They don't seek the end. But they know that what gives value to life is having an objective worth dying for. The future is unpredictable and inevitable. Someday you won't be here anymore. Like this, you will be gone. Do you know that the tree for your coffin has probably been cut already? For the warrior and for an ordinary man, the urgency of living is the same, because neither knows when they will take the last step. For that reason, we have to be attentive to death. It can jump at us from any corner. I knew a guy who went up on a bridge and urinated above a passing electric train. The urine touched the high voltage cables, which gave him an electrical shock and burned him to cinders on the spot. Death is not a game. It is reality. Without death, there would not be any power in what sorcerers do. It involves you personally, whether you want it to or not. You can be so cynical that you discard other topics of these teachings, but you cannot make fun of your end, because it is beyond your power to decide, and it is implacable. Destiny's coach will take all of us without distinction. But there are two kinds of travelers: warriors who can leave with the totality of themselves because they have fine-tuned every detail of their lives, and ordinary people with boring existences, without creativity, whose only hope is in the repetition of their stereotypes until the end. People whose end won't make any difference, whether this end happens today or in 30 years. We are all there, waiting on the platform of eternity, but not everyone knows it. Awareness of death is a great art. When a warrior has put an end to his routines, when he doesn't care anymore whether he has company or is alone, because he has heard the silent whisper of the Spirit, then you can say that truly he has died. From that point on, even the simplest things in life become extraordinary for him. For this, a sorcerer learns how to live again. He tastes each moment as if it were the last one. He doesn't waste any effort on feeling dissatisfied, nor does he throw away his energy. He doesn't wait until he becomes old to ponder the mysteries of the world. He is ahead. He explores. He knows and marvels. If you want to make space for the unknown, you must be aware of your personal extinction. Accept your destiny as the unavoidable fact that it is. Purify that feeling. Become responsible for the incredible event of being alive. Don't beg in the presence of death. It will not condescend to those who give in. Invoke it, aware that you came to this world to know it. Challenge it, even knowing that whatever we do, we don't have the smallest chance of conquering it. She is as gentle with the warrior as it is merciless with the ordinary man. After this lecture, Carlos gave us an exercise. It concerns an inventory of your loved ones, of everybody who concerns you. Once you have classified them according to the degree of feeling that you have for each, you will take them one by one and pass them through death. A murmur of consternation rippled through the listeners. Making a soothing gesture, Carlos added, "Don't get scared. There is nothing macabre about death. What is macabre is that we cannot face it with deliberation. You should do this exercise at midnight, with the fixation of our assemblage point, when the fixation of our assemblage point is loosened, and we are willing to believe in ghosts. It is very simple. You will evoke your dear beings through their inevitable end. Don't think about how or when they will die. Simply make yourself aware that someday they won't be there anymore. One by one they will leave. God knows in which order. And it doesn't matter what you try to do to avoid it. When invoking them in this way, you won't harm them. On the contrary, you will be seeing them in the appropriate perspective. The focal point of death is prodigious. It restores the true values of life.